Gonna get there. Good morning, everyone. Hey, come and find a seat. We'll get people out in the lobby to come on in, and we're going to get started this morning. Well, what a beautiful day we have out there, and I we can all come and say, this is the day the Lord's made. I'm going to rejoice and be glad in it. Well, last night was phenomenal. Absolutely loved the service and the time of honoring those that got credentials, but we're glad you're up this morning and have come and joined us. We're going to have one session this morning as a general session, and then we're going to break up and two different groups. We've got associate pastors and lead pastors, and then Joe Epley's going to come up here in just a minute. He'll give you a little bit more rundown of what his breakout session is going to be on. So, all right. We're getting them here. Joe, they're coming in. Why don't you come on up and share with us?
Thank you, Pastor Dave. I had a few things to share with you about. Just because there are so few opportunities where I have a captive audience of this many pastors in the same room. So have you ever heard of Glacier Bible Camp? It's a really cool place. And listen, Glacier Bible Camp is something that I get the lovely privilege to promote, and we get the lovely privilege of putting on. Amen? Hey, listen, I will hustle from now until camp and probably even after camp to get help and to fill spots. But if you ever want to preempt my recruiting attempts, and you say, Joe, what if I came and offered you help? See, that would be a godsend. So just think about it. Please feel free to talk to me today. If you're like, Joe, where would I fit at Glacier Bible Camp? I don't even know. I will find a spot or 5 for you, okay? I promise not to run you ragged, but also please keep in mind, Glacier Bible Camp's a sprawling thing. If you have people in your congregation, people who make food or people who can have fun or people who can help us clean things, those are all important skills to have. You don't just have to bring cabin staff to camp. You can bring others. We would love it. Second thing I would love to make mention of is we have an event coming up called Leaders Breakaway. It's for our youth and kids pastors, our primary youth and kids pastors in the state and their spouses. And the reason I bring it up is this. Number one, if you are in that demographic and you have not signed up, please do so. We'd love to have you. Beth and I are starting to really feel like this is one of our core events because of the connections that you make and the chance we have to pour into you as next-gen leaders. I remember 2 years ago when we did this event, there was a leader that came up to me and said, man, this kind of set up my whole summer. Like it was so helpful to be in this space, to be encouraged. It's a chance to connect. And then for those of you who say, I'm not in that demographic, Joe, but how can I help? Well, I'm glad you asked. Instead of hitting you up for regular money, I have a creative solution for you where you can help me and I can help you and we can help the Lord, okay? So hear me out. How many of you don't have to actually raise your hands, sorry. I will just, thank you, Pastor John, he's ready. But I would say something that I thought of the other day that could be an incredible financial blessing to us in our event, but does not necessarily cost you a dime. Anyone ever heard of Thrivent? Some of you have Thrivent in the room. And if you don't know it yet, Thrivent comes every year prepackaged in your life insurance and other policies with these things called action plans. And what you can do is you can typically with Thrivent give some of your money. It usually comes in the form of a debit card to a nonprofit or an event of your choice. And I just encourage you, if you already have those things designated, use them for what you already intended to use them for. But imagine with me if 8 of us in this room who had, let's say, unused Thrivent money that we could claim through our Thrivent policies and could send those gift cards to the network office, I could raise $2,000 and not cause anybody a dime. You know what I'm saying? Like, that'd be really fun. So think about it, please. Just pray about it. I will play some soft keyboard music in the background if that helps you. Like, I'm down. And then the final thing is, and I'm going to pick on Pastor Randy a little bit, I enjoyed the exact moment on the platform last night where I realized that Randy had completely forgotten what my breakout was about because he just said, Pastor Joe's doing a thing, and move on. So my breakout is, as we mentioned, kind of geared towards kids and youth pastors. It is not exclusive to that. You're welcome to come if you're not in that demographic. We're going to be talking about a very simple concept. The title might grab you. You might not understand the reference, but it's called The Power of a Side Quest, which is a video game term. But really what it's about is all of us have the things that we got into ministry for, correct? All the things that we signed up to do, the ones in the job description. And then there's everything else you do in ministry, which is a lot. And sometimes that a lot can be a lot. But I just want to have some time this morning to discuss and talk about how do we bring those parts of the story, the parts that don't look like they're moving the plot forward, into alignment with our story and what God's doing in our life. Because I think that those side quests, those things that we end up doing, the nursing home services that I helped serve at as a youth pastor, was absurd, but it helped me a lot. So, turns out. But that's all I have. I'm going to pass it back to Pastor Dave. Thank you for the mic time. Please hit me up for all sorts of things today. We appreciate you.
All right. Thank you, Joe. For all of our minister spouses that are in the room, and of course, last night we had a lot of ladies up here, and their husbands were with them. So this is just for women. But every other year in the fall, we put on a minister spouse retreat. And Colleen is going to come and share just a little bit about what that's going to be about.
We're having it again at Fairmont Hot Springs. And this is such a special time. I look forward to it all 2 years in waiting. But we get to go, and normally the room costs at Fairmont are over $400 now a night. But they're letting us get them for the same price we've had the last several retreats at $175 a night. So if you bring a friend, it'll be $175 each because it's 2 nights. It's October 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. And on Saturday, we dismiss before noon so you can get home in time for church on Sunday easily. But this is such a fun time to go hang out with the ladies. It's very relaxing. We do a lot of talking and being with girlfriend talk and in the hot tubs. And for $175 plus your gas to get there, all of your meals are covered. There's no retreat costs. So bring a friend and come and just expect to have a really great, relaxing time in the Lord with good fellowship. So hope to see you there. Also today, we're not having a tea or a coffee today. We decided since it's Missoula, a lot of you ladies want to go shopping. And we're down with that. So go shopping, have fun, meet with a friend for coffee if you want to today. And then we'll see you in the fall, October 1st, Thursday night. Thank you.
Thank you, Colleen. Wow, last night I absolutely loved our service, and if you haven't stopped out at the table, Karl has a table right out the door to your right side, and he has got a ton of books that he's written and resource material to help small churches. I love that statement last night that defining yourself as a small church, it's different in Northern California than it is in Montana, but still the concept is the same. You know, a small church is in comparison to where you're living. And what a challenge last night for us to redefine how we really come up with the definition for success. And I know you're going to be blessed this morning and again tonight, but let's give a warm welcome to Pastor Karl as he comes and shares with us. Thank you, my friend. Blessings to you.
Thank you so much, Pastor Dave. Appreciate it very much. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for last night as well. A wonderful reception to being up here, but even more so, I just couldn't get out of here last night. I had so many conversations with so many of you over such wonderful things, and it was such a delight. In fact, Dave Baker, where are you? Okay, so we discovered something really weird last night. So here we are, and it's getting, I've already got my backpack on, and he's just keeping me in the room. And we're chatting about, the church that we're there, and we've made this pastoral transition, which I'll talk about a little bit later, and so on. And then Dave goes, I've got some background in Orange County as well. I go, oh, really, where? He goes, I pastored in a little town called Fountain Valley. And I went, that's my church. That's the church. He's one of the 5 guys who came and went in short succession before I showed up. Right there. He was an interim, but we count him because he was there for the interim was almost a year, so he counts. So he was 2 guys before me. So he so that mess I created, go to him for. No, yeah, Dave and the pastor he served under were 2 of the real highlights during that time. But it was a challenge because remember we concluded last night with you came, you stayed, you loved us, right? We had so many pastors before me who came and who loved them, but they just didn't stay right? He was an interim. He was a kid. He was in his 20s, so you can excuse him, right? And the other ones had reasons to leave too. It's not that everybody has to stay forever. I've been there for 33 years. That's not required, okay? But when you have this constant turnover, it really does start to affect a church. In fact, I had a couple of you ask a question last night that I knew you'd ask, so I'm going to begin before we even get to the session. So the church that you were in slowly grew over about 15 years to about 200. Then in 2 years, it exploded to over 400. Then in less than a year, it collapsed to under 100. What happened? At the time, if you'd asked me, I had no idea what happened. Why was this collapsing? What was going on? But I'm going to walk you through the three things that happened, why it collapsed so quickly after growing so quickly, and I'm going to give them to you in the order in which we discovered them. So first of all, in the season that our church was doubling in 2 years from 200 to over 400 on a Sunday morning, I was about as miserable during that season as a pastor as I've ever been. And here's why. When you move above 200, as I said last night, you have to change from pastoring by presence to pastoring in absence, compensating for your absence. You have to move from what they call shepherd role to a rancher role or a pastor to a manager. And I made that shift willingly. And I found myself spending 90% of my ministry time doing things I'm not good at, not called to do, and that suck my soul dry. I'm not called to be a big church pastor. I'm not equipped. I'm not skilled. That's not where my heart is. I'm not good at doing the big organizational stuff. I'm convinced now that one of the reasons that 90% of the churches in the world are small is because I think maybe 90% of pastors are called specifically and gifted to small church ministry. Right? And in any other context, when you hear that, you would hear that as an insult. But I hope you can hear that from me, not as an insult, but as a reality that we can adapt to. Oh, I'm here because this is what I'm called to do. I'm called to small church ministry, and that's where God has placed me, so I'm going to embrace that. So I was miserable, and the church could sense it, but didn't know what to call it, and people just started leaving because there was, I said, some discomfort in the room. It's because I was happy twice. I was happy on Sunday morning when everybody showed up and on Monday when I got the attendance records. But the rest of my time, I was spending my time, my ministry hours in things that were just eating my soul out from the inside. Now, I'm grateful for those who can do those things that I can't do. I'm grateful for people who are called to build the bigger organizations and so on. Because if everybody pastored like me, we'd probably all still be worshiping in caves or something. Because nothing would have ever gotten built. So I'm grateful for those who have that skill set. It's just not mine. So that was the first thing. It wasn't working. It wasn't what God called me to do. The second thing that we discovered was this. As we look back at it, we realized that we hadn't had any more baptisms in the 2 years of explosive growth than we had in any other 2-year period. We weren't having conversion growth. It was transfer growth. We were the cool church for a while. We'd moved into the school. There was all kinds of cool stuff happening. For a while, for about 6 months, we had on the worship team, we had a turntable on the worship team. It was so cool. It was, I mean, it got out there. You're not going to believe it, but that church got a turntable artist on the worship team, and it's kicking. It's really working. But here's the thing. You attract them with cool, you got to keep them with cool. And so that's what was happening. It was transfer growth. So they come through, and then when another church got cooler, they left and took some of our folks with them. Chasing cool is death. It's not going to work. So first thing, I was miserable. Secondly, it was transfer growth. And then thirdly, when we had that explosive growth from 200 to 400, I actually went to our deacon board and said, okay, I got to hire a bunch more staff because we've got staff for a church of 200. We've got 400 all of a sudden. And in fact, I want to hire enough staff for a church of 600 because we're going to be there in about a year or two. They agreed. So I hired enough staff for a church of 600 people. And that was another issue that I had to deal with when the collapse happened, right? But the reason I had to hire staff from the outside is because I hadn't trained my own people from the inside. We were growing numerically, but we weren't discipling people. We had gone from babysitting basically 200 Christians to babysitting 400 Christians. We weren't discipling people. We were entertaining bored Christians. And you can't sustain that. Well, you can continue to grow that, but you cannot sustain that, and it wasn't going deep. And so the plug got pulled on that. So those are the three things. I was outside of my gifting. We were doing transfer growth and not conversion growth, and we weren't going deep. So today, if we were to double, and right now we're at about the 200 point again. That seems to be our resting place, our shoe size. But if we were to double again over the next few years, we could do so without hiring anybody from the outside, because we have discipled our own people so much that we have a deep bench in every single position. And we've concentrated on that. In fact, we've got such a deep bench, we keep sending people elsewhere because we're a training and sending center now. And so by going back to the discipleship drawing board changed everything for us. So that's just to answer that question that I know many of you had in your mind. But for this session, we're going to take a look at big churches, small churches. What's the difference? And quite frankly, why does it matter? And once again, we'll put the QR code up for you. All of the notes for this session, last night's session, and tonight's session, everything from me is going to be there, including any of the information about the 100 Days to a Healthier Church online leadership series coming up. You can get all of it there. So here I was, back to my story again. I was taking this 40 days away. I was miserable. The church was healthy, but it wasn't getting bigger, and I was trying to figure out why. And part of the reason I ended up there was because almost every voice speaking into my head in situations like this was telling me I had to get bigger, including going to every year to my version of what you're here for, the Southern California Assemblies of God Leadership Conference. Every year I would go, and every year my district super would get up, and he would give a state of the denomination report, as he should. And every year a part of that report had some numbers attached to it, as it should. And every year, this is one of the statements that was made by my district superintendent in the state of the district report. Over 90% of our churches are under 200, and over 80% of our churches are under 100. That statistic didn't change year after year after year, and it was a part of the presentation every year. And every year when he would make that statement, the very next sentence was always some version of, we got to fix this problem. And so every year, my response, and in fact, the response that spread through the room was, oh no. Oh no. Like there were literal gasps every time he said it, every year. And it didn't change year to year, but every year we were shocked. And every year I would sit there and go, oh no, I'm a part of the problem. My pastor is telling me that the fact that we've got so many small churches is a problem we need to fix. And that's me. I'm a part of the problem. I have to get my numbers up because I don't want to be a part of the problem. I want to be a part of the solution. And this was one of many voices speaking to my heart. Now, just so you know, my district super knows I'm here talking to you about him. He's learned stuff. I've learned stuff. We're good. We don't use this language anymore. It was part of the learning process for all of us. Okay, but he did that every year. So every year I would go, oh no. And then I took that 40 days away. I talked to that counselor. I'm beginning to think, what does it look like to define success in ministry without numbers attached to it? And I'm thinking this, and I'm trying to figure it out. And I go to district conference again. And they get up and they give the state of the district report. And that thing comes up again. And that sentence is out. And I know the next sentence is going to be some version of, we have to figure out how to fix this. And have you ever been in a room like this, where the speaker says something and it triggers a thought process in your brain, so you're going off over here while the speaker is going off over somewhere else. And for the next 3 or 4 minutes, the speaker might as well be Charlie Brown's teacher because all you're hearing is wah, 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 right? Yeah, maybe happening to some of you right now. I understand. Well, that happened to me. That year, he gave those statistics. And that year, instead of reacting with, oh no, I reacted with, oh, so what? Okay, fine. My church is small. Okay, fine. We got a lot of churches. There's a lot of small churches. I don't care anymore. And whenever anybody says, I don't care anymore, what that actually means is they care too much to admit it to themselves anymore. I don't care anymore is a dangerous place. And I was in that dangerous place. Oh, so what? But I'm also curious and I'm stubborn. So when I ask a question like, so what? I want to find out the answer. So I looked around and I did some research and I tried to figure out, okay, so what? What does that actually mean? And here's what I discovered. The number of small churches within our group says nothing about the health of that group. And here's how I know that. I want you to imagine that a group of churches, let's say Assemblies of God District, is in a period of renewal and revival. Things are going great. God is moving. Amazing things are happening. A part of that period of renewal and revival will involve the planting of new churches, right? Right? And when we plant new churches, what size do they tend to be? So because we're doing well, we're creating more small churches, not fewer. This is demographically proven to be true. You can take a group of churches that's in renewal and revival, the percentage of small to large remains the same as a group of churches that's in decline. In decline or in renewal and revival, the percentage of small to large remains relatively stable across denominations, across cultures, across countries. It doesn't change very much. That's almost because maybe that's how Jesus designed it. When Jesus said, I will build my church, I don't think what he had in mind was only a world filled with grand cathedrals and big box megachurches. I think he had some of those in mind. And I think he had a whole bunch of mid-sized churches in mind. And I think what he had in mind was, in addition to that, hundreds of thousands of way stations of faith that were small enough that they could go anywhere. That must be what he had in mind, because that's what he's been doing for 2,000 years. Again, last night we talked about it. This is God's strategy. Let's get on plan with God's strategy. So after that, after I figured out the answer to the so what, I started asking myself, okay, now what? Now that I know that small isn't necessarily wrong, what am I going to do about this? What do we do next? So this is in my heart, in my mind. I'm not constantly thinking about it, but it's always in the back. And one day I decided I had a day off, and I decided to watch Apollo 13, the movie, right? And if you've never seen the movie, it's the recounting of what was supposed to have been the third moon landing. Partway to the moon, there's damage to their vessel, and what was supposed to have been an exploratory mission on the moon becomes a rescue mission. They don't know if the astronauts will get home alive. Spoiler alert, they made it okay. I actually had somebody at the end of an illustration come to me in a panic at the end. You didn't tell us if the astronauts were okay or not. So now I just tell everybody they made it. So the movie is actually, it's considered the most scientifically accurate movie out there for science because it goes really accurately about what happens. And it's one problem after another. And at one point, they rush into mission control, and they rush up to the head of mission control, and he goes, what's the problem now? And they go, they're running out of air filters. And he goes, how did we send them up without enough air filters? And they answer him, well, we sent them up with enough, but a bunch of them are in their landing module, which, of course, they didn't use because they didn't land on the moon. They've spent all their time in the main cabin, and they've used up all the air filters in the main cabin. He goes, well, the landing module is still attached. Have them float over like 10 feet, grab them, bring them over, and plug them into the main cabin. They respond, yeah, we had them do that. They're the wrong size and shape. They don't fit into the hole. To which in the movie, at least, he responds with, oh, tell me this isn't a government program. Very next scene shows a couple of engineers taking a big box of materials and dumping it on another big table for all the other engineers. And essentially what they tell them is this: everything that's on this table is everything that's on Apollo 13. So using only what's on this table, you have to figure out how to make this fit into this or they die. And the clock is ticking. Oh, and by the way, there's not a single item on this table designed to do the job. Get it done anyway. I paused the movie and I went, that may be the best picture I've ever seen of what every day is like in the life of a small church pastor. Really, Lord, this is what you gave me to work with? Yep. And the mission hasn't changed and lives are at stake. Get to work anyway. But I wasn't taught how to use this. I don't care. That's what you got. That's the mission. Get the mission done. So from about 2005 to about 2015, there were a couple really big leadership books that made it into the church leadership world by a guy named Jim Collins. They were good to great and built to last. They're actually very good books. I read both of them and I've taught from both of them. And from those books, there were a couple real big sayings. And one of the sayings that kept being repeated in almost every church leadership conference for about 10 years was this: you got to get the right people on the bus. What he meant was when you're hiring your staff, that's one of the most important decisions you make. You got to get the right people on the bus because one wrong person in the wrong seat can take the whole bus off the cliff. And so they would teach us that in church conferences, and they'd say, so pastors, when you're hiring your staff, if you have to spend a little more money, if you need to take a little more time to get the right staff member, that's a really important decision. Spend that extra money, spend that extra time if you need to, get the right people on the bus. And I'm sitting there listening to this and going, get the right people on the bus? These are my people. This is my bus. You're acting like I have options that I do not have. When I hire staff, my church doesn't have enough money to hire me. What are you talking about? Spend extra money on staff, right? And they're talking to less than 10% of the pastors in the room for whom this applies, right? And I'm sitting there going, don't tell me how to get the right person on the bus. Tell me how to work with my Apollo 13 table mess. Because what you call the wrong people, I lovingly call my church members. Tell me how to work with that. That's what I need some help with. It's an entirely different thing, all right? So here's what I discovered. People will come to small churches. Yay! But they won't give up quality to do so. Ooh. Why does the front half of that sentence encourage us, but the back half of that sentence discourages us? Here's why. Because quality looks different in a small church than in a big church. And too often we don't take that into account. In fact, not long ago I was teaching this, and we put the first one up on the screen, and somebody tweeted just the first saying, and I got all kinds of kickback. Oh, yeah, sure, he wants small churches to do all the stuff the big churches are doing. So don't tweet it. That's why I put the second one up much quicker now. Right? Because they got exactly the opposite of where I was going to go with that. Quality looks different in a big church than a small church. We talked about it last night. The difference between big and small is not a matter of scale, it's a matter of type. So the type of quality in a small church is a different type of quality than quality is in a big church. Let me give you an example of that. I live in Orange County, California. So I'm within a less than an hour drive of a whole bunch of churches where I can have this almost exact experience in over 25 places. You pull off the freeway and you start up the church's mile-long driveway. And along that driveway, there are friendly people with signs saying, we're glad you're here. Welcome. This is awesome. And then along the way, there's somebody who has a sign that says, if you're new here, flash your lights. And if you flash your lights, they will guide you to the best parking space in the entire place. And before you get out of your car, friendly people come over to you and are ready to take your children to age-appropriate departments and to bring you over to the greeter station where you get a swag bag of cool stuff, including a coupon for the best coffee you had in your life. And then they usher you into a large, well-lit, air-conditioned sanctuary where you sit in a soft, comfortable seat holding this awesome cup of coffee. And when the band starts the service, the band is singing songs from their latest album. That is quality. In a big church, quality is visible and technical. Now, I go to a lot of small churches. When I go to a big church, I know what experience I'm going to have. It's going to be pretty similar, and we'll talk about why in a little bit. But when you go to a small church, who knows what you're going to get? But here's the thing. Quality looks different in a small church. You're not going to get the visible and technical quality. You're going to get something else. And let me give you an example of that. The week after Rick Warren's last Sunday at Saddleback, Shelley and I have a good friend who's been on staff at Saddleback for over 20 years. So we called her up, took her out for coffee because we knew she'd be feeling down. And she was. So we just comforted her over coffee, and we were talking about her time at Saddleback. She was saved under Rick's ministry. She got hired at Saddleback. She worked on staff for over 20 years at Saddleback. And at one point in the conversation, she happened to mention that she'd never, ever had a conversation with Rick Warren up until this point, on staff for 20 years, because they have 500 staff members. Rick's not unfriendly. You just can't get around all those people. All right. She said, I feel like I've lost a family member. I was led to the Lord under him. I was a disciple under him. And she has been discipled. She is as strong a Christian, as good a Christian worker as you will find, and has never had a conversation with her lead pastor. She doesn't need to. She's been discipled anyway. She's been pastored in her small groups on her leadership ministry teams. There's nothing missing in her spiritual walk because she didn't have a conversation with her lead pastor. So that's fine. But if you go to a small church on a Sunday, you're going to have a conversation with the pastor the Sunday you show up. In fact, I'm going to give you an assignment, especially if you pastor a church, if you are the lead pastor of a congregation with fewer than 100 people on a Sunday, I'm going to give you an assignment. I believe you have a pastoral obligation to have at least a short conversation with every new person who shows up on a Sunday. Really? I got to talk to all of them? Relax, there aren't that many of them. You know it, I know it. Chill. You'll go weeks without having to have a conversation. Right? Okay, let's be honest about it. So what's the quality difference between the big church and the small church? In the small church, you show up, the pastor has a conversation with you. And if they show up the next Sunday, pastor, if you remember their name the second Sunday they show up, the likelihood that they will make your church their home church shoots way up high. Even if you didn't preach great that week. Because here's the deal. They can get better sermons on their phone without getting out of bed. That's not why they showed up to your church. If they're going to leave their bed, they want to get something in the church that they can't get at home. And the only thing they can get at your church they can't get at home is those relational connections. So let's go out of our way to do that. The small church's superpower is the relationship connection, and especially with the pastor. When I ask small church attenders why they attend a small church, they give me two main reasons. And the reason number one is this: because the pastor knows my name. There's about half the Christians in the world who attend small churches because they have this weird need to be pastored by their pastor. And I've been told that that's a wrong thing to want. I've had the big church growth guys go, no, that'll just hinder the growth of your church. Nonsense. I was talking to somebody this morning who started a small church. There were 2 or 3 people, so they got around a table. When I was younger, when I was a kid, I had many people tell me, if 2 people show up, you still preach like the room is full. Bad advice. If you got 2 people who show up, pastor 2 people. Now, put systems in place for 4. Right? If you got 20, pastor 20, but have systems in place for 40. Okay? But pastor the people you've got appropriate for the size that you've got. Because that's the quality experience people want when they come to a small church. They're not coming for the band that just put out their latest album. They'll go to the big church for that. They're coming because they want to make a connection. So let's make sure that our connections get stronger. All right, let's take a look at this Venn diagram. We gave it a bit of a hint last night. I came up with this Venn diagram to help us describe some of the differences between big and small churches. Because when I started doing the research into size differences between churches, anytime a book had an illustration in it, the illustration was always stair steps or a ladder. Small churches on the bottom, big churches on the top. And if you put small on the bottom and big on the top, what are you saying subconsciously about the value of small? You're saying small bad, big good. So I wanted to come up with a way of showing the differences between them without it having a quality difference, because there is no quality difference. And the Venn diagram answers that, and here's how. So the Venn diagram says this: the bigger your church is, the more you will have in common with other big churches. The smaller your church is, the less you will have in common with big churches. That's all. Not better or worse, more in common, less in common. So if you've ever gone to a conference and you've heard somebody speak from a church of thousands and you're in a church of 50 or fewer, you may have walked out many, many times and gone, I got nothing. But you may talk to a friend of yours who pastors a church of a couple hundred, and they've taken notes like crazy, and they can take it all home, and they're going to do it. This is awesome. Are they just that much smarter than you? No, they've got just that much more overlap. What they're saying in that left-hand circle isn't incorrect. It simply doesn't have that much overlap with your circle. What you're doing in the right circle isn't incorrect. It just doesn't have a lot of overlap with most of the people who are doing pastoral teaching because they're coming from the other circle. But nobody told me this. So I'd go to big church conferences and I'd go, they've got to figure it out. I'm just going to scale it down. They didn't tell me it's not a matter of scale, it's a matter of type. So I thought I could just scale it down and try it, and I didn't realize some of it just doesn't apply to me. Bottom line is this: many big church principles don't translate well into a small church context. Why? Because Starbucks isn't supposed to start selling furniture. Quit trying to be like the IKEA. That's not your calling. That's not your strategy. That's not how where God put you. If you get to that size, will you make an adjustment in that? Yeah, you'll make those adjustments if that happens. But in the meantime, do it appropriate for small, and most big church principles aren't going to translate. They're not wrong. You're not stupid. There's just not a lot of overlap. So in small churches, we really have to understand three principles. The first principle we need to understand is the place where the circles overlap. There are principles that apply in every church everywhere. This is mostly what we learn in Bible college, right? So the stuff that applies in every church everywhere, make sure you understand that as well as you can. You will need that wherever you go. Secondly, when you find yourself in a smaller church, now you need to understand what's happening in the circle on the right. All the things that apply in all small churches. That's what my ministry is about. Here are the things that apply in small churches everywhere. And at this point, we've done it in multiple languages, multiple denominations, multiple countries. So what I stick to is the stuff that's worked everywhere. This is the stuff that we all have in common. But after we figure those two things out, you got this third part, so we're going to add these other circles. So while the overlap is what all churches have in common, and the circle on the right is what all small churches have in common, the smaller your church is, after you've figured out those two pieces, there's going to be a big part left over, and you're going to look at it and go, okay, this isn't like all churches. This isn't like all small churches. I think I'm the only church in the world that has to deal with this. And you're right. And here's how it goes. The smaller your church is, the bigger that third part is. And here's why. It's because of something called the law of large numbers. The law of large numbers is a sociological phenomenon that states that the bigger a crowd is, the more predictably that crowd behaves. That's why, as I described earlier, I can go to 25 megachurches near me and have virtually the same experience because of the law of large numbers. This is how every polling company works, okay? So if a Pew or Barna or Gallup wants to put a poll out into the field and figure out how the Montanans feel about something, right, they have to do three things right. One, they have to ask the right kind of questions. Two, they have to ask it of the right demographic mix of people. And third, and for our talk today, they have to have what's called minimum sample size. So you can't just survey the people in this room and go, oh, here's how everybody in Montana feels about, no, we're way beneath minimum sample size. Plus, we're not exactly a mixed demographic, right? A bunch of Christian pastors, right? But for this minimum sample size, we're way beneath minimum sample size. For Montana, you probably have to interview a minimum of 4,000 or 5,000 people. And then you're above minimum sample size, then you're in a large number, and then all you have to do is add zeros, and you're going to be right within a 3 or 4 point margin of error, okay? So how does that apply to the church? I want you to imagine that you pastor a church of 2,000, and you're at a conference where the speaker pastors a church of 20,000. Virtually everything the speaker says that they do at their church, you can probably do at your church. Just drop a zero and you're good to go. But they're 10 times bigger. Yeah, but you're both above minimum sample size. The law of large numbers says both of those sizes are going to behave predictably. You just have to scale it down. At that point, it is not a matter of type. It is a matter of scale. But what we think is, okay, I'm pastoring a church of 200. I'll just drop 2 zeros. No, because you're beneath minimum sample size, and it doesn't work that way. And if you're in a church of 50, it's even going to be more different. And then you can have 2 churches of 50. They can be in the same denomination, in the same town, on the same street, and you might as well be on 2 different planets. Why? Because they have 50 different people here than the 50 people over here. Now, I know the Church of 2000 here has 2,000 different people in the Church of 2000 over here, but the law of large numbers says they will have more in common than they have difference, even if they're of different denominations and in different towns. And I know this because I've explored all of them. And I tell you, once you get above 1,000 or so, the predictability takes over. And that's not a bad thing. That's just the nature of size, right? But the two churches of 50, why are they so different? Here's why. People. Right? In this church of 50 over here, when they say goodbye to one family, they lose their entire children's ministries department. Because when that one family left, they didn't just take all the workers, they took all the kids. Now, in the Church of 2000, when they lose their children's worker, they don't close the department, they just get another right person on the bus. But little shifts can make big differences in small churches. Whereas in this Church of 50 over here, there's that one person, and when they don't show up on a particular Sunday, we all love them, but when they don't show up on a particular Sunday, we all breathe a little easier, because at least this week we won't have that weird conversation in the church lobby. And don't any of you look at me like, I don't know what you're talking about, Karl. All my people are perfect. No, I know that's not the case. Here's how I know it. There's a principle. Here's the rule. Every church has been assigned one. Yeah. And if your church doesn't have one right now, some other poor church has two. And if you're not sure who it is, it may be you. Every church has one. And now, the pastor of a church of 2000, they have that as well, but that just means they get a weird email once a week. It's not a big deal in a big church. But in a church of 50, give or take, that one person can ruin your Sunday. That one person can split the church. That one person has driven pastors out of ministry. Because if the law of large numbers states that the bigger the crowd is, the more predictably it behaves, the flip side of the law of large numbers is this. The smaller the crowd is, the more impact each person has for good and for bad. This is the why is my church so weird part that I was promising last night. Right? The smaller the church is, the weirder it is, because the more impact each person has for good or for bad. So I described some of the bad, but let's describe the good. I want you to imagine that you play a little guitar. You're not great, but you can follow along with some chords. And you go to the mega church I just described where the band is singing songs from their latest album. You are not getting on that stage. Wouldn't be good for you, wouldn't be good for them, doesn't fit the context. But if you play a little guitar, you can follow the chords, but you're not great, and you show up at a church of 50, you're leading in worship in a month. In fact, if they find out you play guitar, their first question will be, is your guitar in your car now? I told you earlier, there are two main reasons people say they go to small churches. Reason number one was the pastor knows my name. You know what reason number two is? Because I can make a difference there. There are people who go to small churches specifically because they have small church-specific gifts and callings, things that work in a small church that don't work in a big church. And this is not a bad thing. It's something to understand and to lean into and use as a strategy. They've done studies on this. You can compare one healthy church of 1,000 to 10 healthy churches of 100. 10 healthy churches of 100 will have a higher percentage of giving, more people called into ministry, more people who go into the mission field, much higher volunteer percentage, much, much higher. Why? Because one church of 1,000 only needs one lead pastor and 10 churches of 100 need 10. One church of 1,000 only needs one youth pastor with others underneath them, but 10 churches of 100 need 10 people leading youth and 10 people overseeing the nursery and 10 people leading women's ministries and men's ministries and all of that. And most of the people who are leading those ministries in small churches are learning how to lead them as they're leading them. And so people show up with a passion to help, but without the skill set that is required at a big church. Don't put someone who's figuring it out in charge of something at a church of 1,000. It doesn't fit the context. It's not right. They need to hire people who have already been trained somewhere else, probably at your small church. fact, they've done surveys of that as well. I was at a conference, biggest room I've ever spoken to, 8,000 people, just outside of Atlanta several years ago. And before I was introduced, the speaker introduced me as a small church pastor, and it was a room full of youth and children's pastors, 8,000 of them. And he said, before the speaker comes out, if you received the majority of your original training for youth or children's ministry by doing it in a church of under 100 people, I want you to stand. And about 6,000 people stood. The small church is the training ground for the body of Christ. And not just for the big churches, but for anywhere. Because we give them an opportunity when they're not ready for the big church, when they don't have the full skill set yet, when they don't know how to do it at all, and we train them how to do it as they're doing it. Right? So the small church has that opportunity. So don't run away from that. Don't think, oh, I wish I had somebody trained. Train them. Train them. I used to teach about this, and I didn't use the phrasing correctly, and I had a couple people a couple times come to me and go, you know what, Karl, I've done that. I've delegated that to others, and they just don't know how to do it. And each time I'd have to answer, I didn't say delegate. I said disciple. In most small churches, either the pastor does it themselves, or we delegate it to someone else who doesn't know how, and when they don't know how, we take it back and we do it ourselves again, and then we blame them. Don't blame them, disciple them. If you haven't discipled them, it's not their fault. All right? Train them up. Okay? So the bigger the crowd is, the more predictably they behave. The smaller the crowd, the more impact each person has for good or for bad. So give them opportunities for impact. And it's okay if they're not going to do it as well as you at the beginning, because you didn't do it as well as you at the beginning. Jesus was patient with you. Be patient with them. It'll be okay. All right, so let's take a look at some significant differences between big and small. I'm going to look at it in 3 different factors. And this will hopefully give you a filter. One of the things I hope out of this session, and I've had it confirmed by so many pastors and church leaders over the years, is that by this little next segment, I'm going to give you a filter by which you can determine what part of is overlapping with you and what part isn't. So the next time you go to a conference and the speaker's from a big church, or you listen to a podcast by someone who's coming from a big church standpoint, or a book or whatever, you can now listen to them, read their stuff, get their information, and you can start by going, okay, some of this might apply and some of it might not. I got to figure out how much overlap there is. But now I got to figure out, how do I know what's going to apply and what isn't going to apply? So this will help with some of that, okay? I'm going to give you a filter so that from this point on, you'll actually get greater value from our big church friends, because you'll know how to pick and choose a little better, okay? Let me walk you through this. Big church leadership emphasizes process, systems, and programs. And when I say emphasizes, I don't mean that that's what's important in the church. No, what's important in a big church is the same stuff that's important in a small church. Worshiping Jesus, serving in ministry, and all of that. But if you spend any time on a big church staff and in a big church staff meeting, you know that 90% of the conversation is about process, systems, and programs. Why? Because when you've got an IKEA-sized church, you need arrows on the floor, process, systems, and programs. Because if it falls apart even a little bit, the whole thing becomes mayhem. So they've got to talk about this. And one of the things I love about my big church friends is when they figure out a new process, a new system, or a new program, they tell everybody as quickly as they can. They are really generous in sharing what they learn. Nobody's trademarking any of this. They're sharing it with everybody. But so the fault isn't in them. The fault is that none of us are understanding clearly enough that not all of the stuff that they're discovering is going to apply in most churches. So they just share it because it worked for them, and they assume it'll work for you. You've got to decipher that. Now, processes and systems and programs matter in small churches as well, but they come secondary to these 3 other things. In a small church, what matters? Small churches need to emphasize relationships, culture, and history. So let's spend a few minutes talking about those 3 key words: relationships, culture, and history. First of all, relationships. As I told you earlier, one of the primary reasons that people say they go to small churches is because the pastor knows my name. They want to have a relationship with the pastor. And they're not wrong that part of their spiritual growth and maturity is because of a connection to the lead pastor. It matters to them that they have that relationship with you. So we need to lean into that instead of shying away from it. Relationships matter in a small church. Now, here's part of the challenge. Years ago, they started changing the name of greeters and ushers, and they started calling them the First Impressions team. And the moment I heard it, I loved it. Because greeter just usually means I just hand them a bulletin or what, and I don't know what ushing is. But when you tell someone they're on the First Impressions team, you're giving them a mission-based title and not an action-based title. You're telling them that your mission is to make a good first impression. That's a fantastic title for that role. First Impressions team, I embrace it. I think it's one of the best changes I've seen in the last 10 years or so. First Impressions team. Now, here's how it goes. Here's the difference between big churches and small churches in the relationships of the First Impression team. In a big church, the friendliest people are on the First Impressions team. So you put it out there, and you may even do a personality survey, and you have interviews, and you only let the friendliest, nicest people who know how to have subtle relationships with new people who are afraid to walk into a building. The friendliest people are on the First Impressions team. In a small church, everyone's on the First Impressions team, whether you want them to be or not. And here's a typical first impression in a typical small church. And again, I just told you all small churches are different, so it's not going to be this everywhere, but you'll recognize this. I want you to imagine that there's a couple, they're trying to find a church that they want to go to. And on Sunday morning, they're sitting in your church parking lot, and they look at each other and go, okay, are we going to go in this week, or are we going to chicken out and go back home again? Let's go in. Okay, they hold hands. Lord, we're looking for a church. May this be the church that you're sending us to. Amen. They go. They open the door, but they can't because it's the wrong door. They go over, they finally find the front door. There's nobody opening it for them. They open it themselves. When they open it, there they see a group of the friendliest people in the world talking to each other. What is it, especially about small churches, we all love talking to each other in the doorway. It's not just my church, right? It's every small church. We just love gathering in the doorway. So here now, these people who are already intimidated, think of it, coming to a small church for the first time is an extremely intimidating thing to do. It's really, really hard. Going to a big church for the first time is easy because it's like going to the mall. And they've designed it that way. They've designed it to make it easy to come in. Right? The statement they use is it should be easy to get in, but you shouldn't get difficult until they hear the gospel. The gospel should be hard, but getting to the gospel should be easy. And they're right. But in a small church, we're just, okay, they walk in, there are all these friendly people. And now these new people who are already intimidated about the process have to physically push their way through other people's relationships in order to get in your building. And that's the first impression you made. Okay, yeah, I know. You don't want to raise your hand. Everybody's looking at me. The people who didn't meet my gaze, I know who you are, and I know why. And that's the way it is in a whole lot of small churches. So we looked at that a few years ago, and we were like, okay, so how do I start? Everybody's on the First Impressions team, so how do we start to fix this? So I wrote up what I call the GIFT plan for friendlier churches. And GIFT is an acronym, and it stands for Greet Someone New, Introduce People to Each Other, Follow Up on Someone, or Thank Someone. And what we did was we told everybody, and I taught this for about a month, about welcoming the stranger, took all kinds of the scriptures about that, and I said, we want to become a friendlier church. I've been telling you to be friendlier, but I haven't told you how. And now I'm going to tell you how. I'm going to give you a simple 4-part acronym. Every Sunday that you come, I want you to do one of these 4 things. I want you to greet someone you've never met before, or I want you to introduce 2 people to each other who've never met each other before, or I want you to follow up on someone that you met recently, or I want you to thank someone for a job well done. You don't have to do all 4, but I'm going to ask for all of you to do one of those every Sunday you come. We started it with our leadership team and got them used to the idea and got them to the point where they were really liking it, and this makes sense. And then we introduced it to the entire congregation. We then made up these cards that we handed to everybody. And on the front of the card, go ahead to the next slide. On the front of the card, it's got who will I gift this week? And on the back side, it's got a place where they can write the people's names, and we've actually made them up. So if that sounds like a tool you might be able to use at your church, we've actually got them back there that you can buy and you can take home, or you can just, figure out how to make it up on your own printer and put your own church name on it. It's up to you, however you want, but that's there available for you. Okay, so this is one of those ways. We tell people to be friendlier, and we don't tell them how. Everybody on your church is in the First Impressions team, whether you want them to be or not. So let's train the entire church how to do it in a way that's memorable and simple. What I discovered was, since then, I've learned the term gamification. I didn't know the term back then, and I didn't know I was gamifying the process. Gamification is you take a task that otherwise might seem laborious or difficult, and you put aspects in it that make it feel like a fun game so that people want to engage in it. And these cards gamify the First Impressions process, because people started coming to me and going, I've got 6 weeks in a row on this. Or somebody else would go, I've got my G, my I, and my F. I'm going for my T this week. Right? They turned it, I didn't do that. They turned it into a game. These little cards just started doing all of that for us. And we kept coming back at it and coming back at it until finally it really changed the whole friendliness dynamic in our church. So I really encourage you to do that. The part of the challenge is, I was taught how to do ministry from here. But the smaller a church is, the more important ministry in the church lobby is. In a big church, sometimes the only time that many church members are ever going to hear the pastor's voice is going to be from the pulpit. But in a small church, your main engagement with them will happen in the church lobby. It's the reason I named my podcast The Church Lobby, because I want to have conversations like we have in the church lobby. There is way more honest ministry going on in the lobby than there is in the sanctuary. That's where we say what we really mean. Right? So as pastors, I was trained to do ministry from here. And in small churches, I realized I need to get better at doing ministry there. Because if you remember their name if you get their name that first Sunday and have a conversation, you remember their name that second Sunday in the lobby. Even if you preach badly that week, the church lobby ministry will carry the day. That's the primary reason they come. They don't know how to phrase it that way. They're coming for relationships, but relationships happen in the church lobby. So we need to get better at it. We need to train our people for it, and we as pastors and leaders need to get better at it. And I'm speaking about this as a severe introvert. I am really introverted, like it's bad. Like, I love being with you. I am having the greatest time this week, but I am going to crash when I get home because y'all are wearing me out. Right? And that's not because I don't love it. I love it. Introverts don't dislike people. Introverts love people just like extroverts love people, but you drain our energy. Right? So as an introvert even, I'm realizing I have to get better at this. So that's the relationship part of it. The relationships are the superpower of the small church. Lean into it. So that's relationships. The second word then is culture. Small church leadership emphasizes relationships, culture, and history. So we need to define culture before we talk about culture. So let's take a look at this. Culture has been a big part of the conversation in church leadership for a long time, and justifiably so, because culture is one of those things that we are not as aware of as we should be, but that affects things to a greater degree than we realize. So here's how my definition of culture for our conversation today. Culture is the unwritten set of rules that governs everything a church does. Two key words in that sentence that I want to walk through. Culture, first of all, is the unwritten set of rules. You will not find your church's culture in your bylaws or in your mission statement. It's unwritten. So if it's unwritten, where do I find the culture? You find the church's culture in statements like, we don't do it that way in our church. That's a statement of culture. Or, that's just the way it is in our church. That's a statement of culture. In fact, the strongest culture enforcers in your church probably have no idea they're enforcing culture, which makes it harder to change if they don't even know they're doing it. Right? The strongest culture enforcers in your church, they don't know they're enforcing culture. They're just doing what has always been done. Now, the culture conversation that comes from big churches, literally every time I've heard it, is this: Pastor, You are the one who establishes the culture in your church. You decide what the culture is going to be. You make sure that the leadership team understands it and that they enforce it. You preach it, you teach it, you live it. You enforce the culture. Culture comes from the top down. You set it. Pastor, the culture comes from you. And they are correct in their circle. But if you're a young new pastor going into an old small church in a small town and you try to tell them what their culture is, well, God bless you in your next church. That is not going to fly. They're not wrong. That part of their circle just doesn't overlap with our circle. Here's why. Here's how it works in a small church. In a small church, pastors of pre-existing small churches don't set the culture. We inherit the culture. This is so important, and we're never told this. You've got to understand this. You're not setting the culture. You're inheriting a culture. And this is truer the smaller the town is, the smaller the church is, the older the church is, the older the average member of the church is, the newer the pastor is, and the younger the pastor is. The more of those factors you put together, the more true this is. You are not setting that culture. You are inheriting the culture, so be aware of that. So I know you're looking at that and going, well, if I can't set the culture, what am I pastoring for? Am I just supposed to go along with everything? No, here's how it works. There are ways that you can change the culture, but you've got to take these 3 steps. So if you are a pastor in a pre-existing small church that's trying to figure out how to fix the culture, again, the unwritten set of rules that governs everything a church does. Let me give you a little more definition of it before we go to the next thing. Jesus' parable of the sower is a parable of culture. The seed is the mission, and the seed is good everywhere it lands. There is nothing wrong with the seed. Whether or not the seed grows depends on the culture on which it lands. So the first culture that it lands on, Jesus describes as the pathway. It's hard. It doesn't penetrate at all. The birds pick it up and it's gone. This is what I call the stubborn church culture. We don't do it that way. It doesn't penetrate at all. And if you've got a stubborn culture, do not go at it with a jackhammer. They'll just jackhammer you back. What does a hard soil need? They need water slowly over a long period of time to help soften them. So if you've got a stubborn culture, you need to go in softly and slowly, and you need to have the water just soften their hearts. You need to help soften their hearts. The second kind of culture is the culture where you put the seed out there and they go, that's a great idea. And then nobody shows up for the planning meeting. This happened at our second church, the one in the Redwoods. It was way up in the hills. Hill people are interesting. They are interesting. They were for everything, but there was no follow through. This was the shallow church. And Jesus says, in this soil, it goes in, it grows up, but it doesn't have enough depth to grow a root, so it can't last. That's the shallow church. So if that's the case, you need discipleship. You need to help them go deeper. And then there's a third type of culture. The seed lands on it. You just put out the idea. They go, that's a great idea, Pastor. I'll add that to the 17 other things I'm doing at the church this week. That's the busy church culture. Right? Jesus says it grows up, but it grows up among other things that choke it out. That's the busy church culture. Of all the bad church cultures in American churches, this is probably the most prevalent one. And part of the reason is because we're looking at the big church that can do all this stuff, and we're trying to do all this stuff. And here's the deal. If you in a small church try to do everything they're doing in a big church, only smaller, you'll do everything they do only badly. You're not of the size for that. It's not a matter of scale. It's a matter of type. You need to figure out 1 or 2 things you do well and stick with those. You need to simplify it. Get rid of all the extraneous weeds and thorns and thistles. Get rid of the rest of it. Simplify it. And then the fourth culture, it goes in and it grows up a harvest. Why? Because it's been softened, it's gone deep, and it's been cleared of weeds. So for some of you, this last 3 minutes is going to be the most important talk of the week for you. Because in some of our churches, you've been fighting a mission battle, but you have to fight the culture battle first. Quit throwing good seed into bad soil. So if any of that sounded familiar to you, maybe you've got a stubborn culture, maybe you've got a shallow culture, maybe you've got a busy culture, maybe your bad culture is of some other type. You've got to fix the culture first. So how do you get the chance to fix the culture if you're inheriting it? Here are the 3 steps that you got to take. Step number 1 is this. You've got to know the current culture. Especially if you're new in an existing small church, you go in as a student. I'm going to pay attention. I'm going to listen to the things that are said between the sentences. That's where the culture is going to be found. It's not going to be on the surface. They don't even know it. You got to pay attention to what does that actually mean. Become a student of the culture. Know the current culture. Then step 2, show them what you appreciate about the church's culture. If you go in and all you tell them is what's wrong and what needs to be fixed, you don't have a chance. They're there because they like something. You got to figure out what that something is. Right? It might even be, I love the way you used to do such and such, but you got to find some common ground. They won't get where you want to get them until they get that you get them. Right? They've got to know, oh, this is the Apostle Paul. When I'm among the Romans, right? When I'm among the Greeks, when I'm among the Jews, I figure out what each of those groups has, where can I build that bridge? So become a student, know the culture, show them what you appreciate about the culture, and only then can you, step 3, receive limited permission to participate with them in moving the culture forward. Every once in a while, I'll have a conversation with other folks who do what I do, but who do so on a larger scale. Some of them are names you would know, but it's just weird that I'm now in some green rooms with some of these folks. And every once in a while, they will say something like, you know what? Small church pastors are my heroes. I could never do it. It would drive me crazy, but I so admire the small church pastors who do such hard work. And whenever I ask, why don't you think you could do it? What is it about small church pastoring that would drive you crazy? Every time their answer is this. They want to hire the right person on the bus and fire them when they're not doing their job. But the whole thing that we've got to do, where we got to go through all these steps to eventually receive limited permission and participate with them, and it's always everybody else involved in it, and you got to figure this out. Here's the way it works in a big church. They have the staff meeting. The pastor says, here's what we're going to do, and here's our budget. They go do it. Okay. Here's how it works in a small church. Before you have your official meeting where you make the official decision, you're going to have at least one pre-meeting and maybe a couple of them. And some of the people who will be in the pre-meeting aren't even in the official meeting. But if you don't get pre-approval from them, you are not going to get anywhere in the official meeting. So you have the pre-meeting, you get that pre-approval. Then you go to the official meeting, you fight through that, and you get official approval. And you're still not done because, folks, they're going to be a parking lot meeting. And the parking lot meeting is where it's decided whether or not we're actually going to do this and how. So if you're not understanding and participating in all 3 of those, you think you're just going to show up to the meeting with an agenda and you're going to get official approval and it's going to be fine, and then you can't figure out why it doesn't work. That's why it doesn't work. Did you have your pre-meeting and were the right people in the pre-meeting, and you just stick around for the parking lot meeting afterward where they figure it out how and when this is actually going to get done? And that whole dance, we'll call it, is frustrating for our big church friends. It's frustrating for us. But that is a skill set that the Lord will help you develop if you know you need to develop it. And once you've developed it, it is a skill set of great value. So don't run away from it. Learn it. Lean into it. It's part of the small church strategy that we haven't paid enough attention to. So that's relationships and culture. And now let's look at history. Small towns have long memories. And so do small churches. So if you're in a small church in a small town, you are doubly blessed. We say that with a smile and we laugh with it a little bit, but that should be true. A long history should be a double blessing, but why sometimes does it not feel like a foundation on which to build, but it feels like an anchor that's weighing us back? Right? Let's be real about this. A long history should be a foundation upon which we're building, but it doesn't often do that. So here's the deal. If you're in a place with a difficult history, it's tempting to want to fight it. But here's my advice. If you have a long, difficult history, do not fight it. You will lose. You cannot defeat history. History has an unbeaten track record of victory. Why? Because it's already happened. You can't change the winner of last year's Super Bowl. It's already happened. History will win every time. So if I can't fight history, what do? Go deeper into it. Go deeper into it. What do I mean by that? Well, we celebrated our church's 60th anniversary recently. I think this year is our 65th. And for our 50th anniversary, which was the first big one that I had when I was there, we got out a whole bunch of old documents and so on. And I'm looking through all of them. And I see this newspaper article from about the third year of the church's founding. And the title of the article was, "The Church Can Work with Delinquents." Now, if you're under 40, delinquent doesn't mean they're late in paying their bills. Back in the day when kids were making a mess in the community, we called them juvenile delinquents. Today, we call them at-risk youth. That's probably better. But back then, juvenile delinquents. And the article was an interview with our church's founding pastor. And the guy who wrote it, first paragraph, he says that he was a probation officer and a social worker. And he says, as a probation officer and a social worker, I searched for many months to find a church that was concerned as I was about the needs of juvenile delinquents, and until recently, I couldn't find one. And he describes how he went to church after church after church. Can you help us with troubled youth? And the reason they gave that they couldn't help was they didn't want troubled youth affecting their good kids, which I understand. But if we're not sending the light into the darkness, then what's the point? And then he describes how he met this young new pastor of this brand new church. And he describes the founding pastor of the church that I've been now at for 33 years. And he says, this new pastor, he says he wants to reach a new generation in a new way. And he's willing to try new ideas. And as I'm reading this, I'm going, wow, I'd never seen this before. And I'm reading this, and I lift my head up, and I look outside our window. And for the last 25, almost 30 years now, we have run the only skateboard park in our town. Why? Because at about years 5 or 6 when I was there, we resurfaced our parking lot, and all of a sudden there was noise outside, and I went out, and we had skateboarders everywhere because we had the smoothest surface in town. And I went back to my youth pastor, and we started talking about it. And we realized this was during the era where they actually had, in our Orange County anyway, they had bumper stickers, skateboarding is not a crime. Because everywhere skateboarders went, there were no skateboarding signs put up, and they were arresting kids just for skateboarding. But because they're kids and they're going to skateboard in places they shouldn't skateboard. So we thought, they're here. Do we put up signs or do we find some ramps? And we decided the churches on defense put up signs and churches on offense put up ramps. And so for over 25 years now, we've run the only skateboard park in our town. And more kids have come to Christ, and more of their parents have come to Christ because the kids came to skateboard park than maybe everything that we've else that we've done combined. Because we made one choice to do something on the offense rather than on the defense. They were here already. We decided, let's invite them in. And I'm reading this and I'm going, that was the dream of this church's founding pastor. So here's the deal. If you have a difficult history and people are arguing, we've got to honor the past by singing out of the hymn book. We've got to honor the past by not changing the color of the wall. We've got to honor the past by not changing this carpet. No, go deeper into your church's founding documents. What you will not find there is, we're called to worship Jesus only on this color of carpet. You will not find that in your founding documents. You will find bold visionary statements by bold visionary people. Don't do what your founders did. Think like they thought. Go deeper into the history. Find that passion and reignite that passion again. We think that we're honoring them by doing what they did. No, we honor them when we when we take their passion and we bring it into a new generation again. And you will find that if you look deeper into it. Now, before we take a break, and then you've got some wonderful breakouts coming up for you. One of the ways that we need to be preparing our churches better, and it's one of the ways that the Lord has helped us to do. So a part of as I kind of bring my story to a conclusion. So the Lord helped us to restabilize, to start discipling our people, start bringing the next generation along, realizing that small is good, but that we're going to do ministry from our building because our building isn't big enough to hold all the ministry God has given us. God gave us a building this size, and he gave us a ministry this size. So we can't fit the ministry into the building, so we're going to do the ministry from the building. And we're sending people out, and we're training people, and we're discipling them. And about 9, 10 years ago, I had a conversation with my youth pastor, who at that point had been my youth pastor the entire time I'd been there, 23 years at that point. And we started realizing that it was time for a big change. In fact, he realized it first, and he came and basically said, "Pastor, I want your job." He didn't put it that way. But he came to me and he said, "Pastor, I don't know what to do, but I feel like the Lord is calling me to be a lead pastor for the first time ever." And I thought, I'm going to lose him. And then he said, "But I don't feel called to leave this church. And I don't know what to do." And I said, "So you want my job?" And he went, "No, I don't. But yeah, I guess I do. I don't." He said, "Pastor, I have no problem with what you're doing. I love what you're doing. I love the direction we're going in. And I don't know what to do because I know I'm called to be a lead pastor, but I don't think I'm called to leave this church, and I don't know what that means. I have no desire for you not to be my pastor. I don't know what this means." We spent 4 months in prayer about it, the two of us, until we finally realized this was an answer the Lord was giving for everybody, because this ministry of mine was growing. And my congregation has supported me in it the entire time. When I was gone, they never got upset. They just said, "You go get him, Pastor. We're behind you." And as this was growing, they started seeing he's not going to be able to continue the growth of this and pastor us at the same time. And they thought, they're going to lose me. And I've got the same youth pastor for 23 years. If the pastor leaves, the guy who's been youth pastoring for 23 years and doesn't want to be a pastor is not going to stay under the next pastor. That's not going to work. So they thought, they're going to lose both of us. They're beginning to panic. And the Lord puts on my youth pastor's heart, I feel called to be a lead pastor, but I don't feel called to leave this church. And because we'd been together for so long, he had the nerve to tell me that. Right? He came, the only conversation he and I have ever had where he was afraid. And justifiably so, right? That's a weird conversation to have. But the Lord led us over 4 months praying together. Okay, I'm going to step aside. I'm going to oversee these departments that you're not strong in, and I will help you with that. I'll be a part of your preaching team, if that's okay. You're going to be the lead pastor. I'll be hands off on all the rest of it. And he said, "That sounds perfect. That's what I'd love to do." So for the next 6 years, I was on staff with him. As this ministry continued to grow and as he took the church through COVID, I got to step aside and watch him do that. That was awesome. I can't tell you how many times during that he came to me and said, "Did you see this coming?" And for the last 8 years now, my former youth pastor has been my pastor. But what we've discovered, because I travel so much, is pastoral succession is the one thing every church knows it's going to have to do that we do almost no training for. And so a pastoral succession almost every time is either caused because of a problem or it creates a new problem or both, because we don't prepare for what we know is inevitable. So every church has got to get equipped for a healthy pastoral succession. So I'm going to ask you to pray with me over this, and I'm going to ask you to scan this QR code, because right now, I don't even know the dates, but probably in the fall, I'm going to launch a 5-part webinar series where we're going to talk through the steps to a healthy pastoral succession that we've learned in our situation and that I've learned from traveling around and seeing so many other churches. If you scan that, you can get on our mailing list. There's no obligation now. There's on that page is a whole bunch of stuff about the kind of things we'll be talking about, what it may look like. But over the summer, I'm going to be designing it. And if you're on the newsletter, I'm going to be sending out 2 or 3 surveys to say what kinds of things would help you in a class like this to help you understand what a healthy pastoral succession looks like. We're probably going to do it in September. We don't know the times and dates yet. But if that is of any interest to you at all, scan that. If you miss it there, you can get it on the book table as well. You can come back and visit me there, which again reminds me, I do have the book table back there. So so many of you have come and already talked to me there, and any of you who want to come and talk to me there as well can too. So most of what I talked about last night, let's go to the books now. Most of what I talked about last night was from the Grasshopper Myth, the IKEA story. My story is in there. That's available also in Spanish. The Spanish is actually free. Small Church Essentials, a lot of what I talked about in this session is from that, including the gift card and so on. Tonight we're going to be talking about things from my latest book, Desizing the Church. 100 Days to a Healthier Church is what our webinar that's starting on May 5th is based on. We can help your church get one step healthier in a 100 days process. We will teach you how to take your church through the 100 days process in the webinar. And as I said last night, if you sign up for that today and you put in the code, and I can walk you through that, come back to the table and I'll show you how. It's $2.99 per church, but because you're here in person, we're going to cut that in half for you. So you and any of your church leaders that need to do it can go through it for $149. We'll teach you how to take your church through a 100-day process that will make them at least one step healthier in 100 days. So see me at the book table. I'd love to have a conversation with you. We're going to have do I hand it off to anybody or do I just dismiss them? All right, Pastor, come on out.
Amen. Wow, this is good stuff. And just thank you so much, Karl, for blessing us and sharing your journey with us, because I know that we have a room full of people that are on that same journey. And what a wonderful blessing it is to get some practical things in your hand that you can put to work. So, hey, we're going to take a 15-minute break. And then in this room here, we will have Phil and Jay will be teaching. In the room to the right, as you're heading out to the outside, then Joe Epley will be over there in teaching as well. So we want to encourage you, take a 15-minute break, then come back in. We've got some wonderful ministries represented over here. If you haven't walked through the booths, be sure and do that. And we just want to thank them for coming and being a part of our conference with us. So, well, take a break, and 15, 20 minutes, come back, and we'll continue on.